It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Hello there. Hello. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? We got Jake Brown here today. Jake is a legendary author of music books. He has written about 1.5 billion music books on basically every genre. Some of the hip-hop artists that he has done books on include Serge Knight, Tupac Shakur, Dr. Dre, Biggie Smalls, 50 Cent, Kanye West, Jay-Z, and more. And then you move to the rock genre, and he's done books on Metallica, Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, Jane's Addiction, Foo Fighters, Guns N' Roses, Smashing Pumpkins, and more. And then if you move to the country genre, he's done books on Luke Bryan, Carrie Underwood, Brad Paisley, Keith Urban, Miranda Lambert, the Dixie Chicks, Toby Keith, Merle Haggard, and many more. So pretty much covers everyone who has ever done music, ever. He's an amazing guy, and it's a great interview. Stick around for that. Please check out Jake Brown's website at jakebrownbooks.com. After the interview, we've got one track to play from Music Submit playlist. Thank you very much to everybody who has been submitting on Music Submit. We get lots of great music and are happy to play it. This week's track is called Reality, and the artist's name is Chloa, spelled Chloa. If I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize. We will be right back with Jake Brown.
Hurry, Bullwinkle! The show's about to start!
I'm coming as fast as I can.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Ooh, don't know my own strength.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Jake Brown. Hey, Jake, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be on.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. I was reading through your bio. Very impressive. I was really impressed by all the books that you've done. And we'll get to the books in a second. But I did want to ask you, how do you get into this? How does someone start? You don't just, sign up for this job. You kind of have to work your way in, don't you?
I kind of got lucky. I was one of those kind of magnet school kids growing up. I play 6 instruments and by ear, and I've always been a by ear, learn as kind of you go type that I always wrote. And so I grew up wanting to be in the record business. It's all I've ever wanted to do. I've luckily worked in it the last 20 years, and I basically started out working for a record label in L.A., and I was doing a lot of their copy, for catalogs and press releases and stuff. And the long story short is I met a publicist / literary agent, and on a kind of a bet, she said, "I bet you could write a book," and I said, I took her bet, and the band I won't mention that she represented that she wanted me to write with, they were kind of an 80s hair band. And I think, I don't think that's the first book I want out. But I wanted to write a book on Suge Knight, that's for a record. And he was just getting released from prison. And, he's a sort of a notorious character in hip-hop, but he's also been responsible for a lot of, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre's, solo career started, getting Tupac out of prison. And all those songs he recorded before his death. He used a lot of the same mob tactics that white, recordmen like Morris Levy used for years to rip off African-American artists and basically flip that script. And because of him, you then had the path was paved for Jay-Z's and Sean Combs and Master P's and all of these other entrepreneurs. So anyway, we actually got a deal for that book with a company named Amber Books. Tony Rose, publisher there, gave me my start. So for the first few years, I wrote hip-hop books because I was such a hip-hop fan growing up. I've done them on 50 Cent and Dr. Dre and Jay-Z and Biggie Smalls. And Tupac Shakur's estate authorized a book in 2005 to his mother, Afeni, called Tupac in the Studio, and that actually launched a signature series that's now a trademark one for me called In the Studio. I've done books there with Hart, Motorhead, Rick Rubin, a bunch of people, Tori Amos, just across the aisle, Iron Maiden, AC/DC, etc. And the great thing about that series, and what I've tried to special in over the years, is you have to have branded series as an author, but you can, like, for instance, Behind the Boards was originally about rock record producers. This latest one's about country producers, so Behind the Boards Nashville. In the Studio, you plug a band's name in front of it or an artist, and you can write about anyone or with anyone. I only do authorized. But yeah, so it sort of led to this career where, as I've continued to work in the business as a songwriter and producer here in Nashville over the last 20 years, I've been very lucky and just had a lot of really amazing artists from across the stylistic spectrum be willing to open up to me about their creative process. And I did a book in 2014 with Joe Satriani, a memoir called Strange Beautiful Music, that did phenomenally well. And that was kind of a mix of a examination of his amazing, almost, outer space musical songwriting and producing process / his personal story. There's a series called Beyond the Beats that interviews rock drummers, Nashville songwriters, a signature series from me here in town. I interview all the music row songwriters that actually write the hits. But with the lead up to then Behind the Boards Nashville, I wanted to do one on the record producers because they're just the unsung heroes of the songwriters. A lot of people think that country stars write their own hits, and it's actually not true most of the time. There's a sort of machine here working behind the scenes to create these amazing songs with the stars, oftentimes, or for them. And so, some of the stories in this book, some of the behind the scenes that fans can get about their favorite country stars, how they work in the studio. You can stream along and listen to the hits from your greatest hits from Luke Bryan and George Strait and Tim McGraw all the way across the aisle to Casey Musgraves, Carrie Underwood, Lady Annabelle, and I guess they go by Lady A now. Every single country act is in here, and all of their producers. It's the most definitive book ever, I think, put out that encompasses all these producers. And we also tell their backstories. So you don't just get stories about their record making, but you get their backstories about the struggles, what they started out doing, how they discovered sound recording. A lot of them were in bands. Norbert Putnam, as an example, was in this book, Produced Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett. He was Elvis Presley's last bass player, and Tony Brown, who's a legend in this town, did George Strait for 20 years and 40-plus number one with people like Vince Gill and Reba McEntire. He was Elvis Presley's last piano player. So there's just these really, really cool. It's a 600-page book. It covers 300 number one hits. So no matter what angle you want to look at it from, if you're an aspiring producer, there's a Bible of advice in this thing. And there's also a lot of, there's kind of the advent of digital technology and Pro Tools Logic shifted the paradigm where a lot of these guys, amazingly talented guys like Zach Crowell and Luke Lair and Chris Stefano, Ross Topperman, these guys play multiple instruments and literally create entire records on their own. I mean, so they're almost like princes, like Prince, the musician, used to do that all himself. And so it really examines the bookends, it's just 50 years of country music production, but it covers every genre, subgenre, every major star, every major hit. We're really proud of it.
This is the book you're pushing now?
Yes, sir. Behind the Boards Nashville.
Behind the Boards Nashville. Okay. Well, I'm just scrolling through the books that you've got up on your website, and I mean, it's unbelievable. You've got everything from Tori Amos to Motorhead to Tupac. I mean, that pretty much covers the spectrum of music right there.
Well, we try anyway. I did a branding podcast this morning, and I was explaining, just for authors, if you want to work, I mean, I've been doing this 20 years, but, there's kind of 3 rules. Always be working, always be networking, and always, 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 always write as diverse a spectrum of collaborations as you can. And so, like, for example, with the In the Studio series, you mentioned Lemmy Kilmister. I had the privilege. I did a book with, and always take anything you can get. It's like if you're an engineer, never turn a gig down when you start out.
Yeah.
My third book I ever wrote was with an adult film star named Jasmine St. Clair. And through writing with her, I interviewed Lemmy for her book, and I had already done the Ann and Nancy Wilson book with Hart by the time that came out, so I pitched Lemmy on that. And we went for that. And I mean, getting to write with Lemmy Kilmister was just amazing before he passed away. It was just such an awesome thing. So I try to write as diverse a catalog as I can. I've got a pretty strong reading following in hip-hop. and in rock and as well in country. And that not only ensures that you continue to work, because remember, there's always young kids. I mean, I get a lot of emails from kids that grew up reading my stuff asking advice, but they're also my competition. You know what I mean? There's always people knocking at the door. You know, being a radio host, I mean, there's always other people that are there if you're not working hard to keep your name out there. So I try to just have as diverse a catalog as I can, because it's also job security. You know?
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned Ann and Nancy Wilson. I have been huge fans of theirs since their first album. What was that like, working with those two sisters?
Absolutely amazing. I had been writing rap books for 5 years, and I was eager to branch out. And in the studio series, I wanted to kind of take it from the Tupac book into a rock act. And so I actually went around. I don't recommend doing it this way, but I went around and I basically interviewed everybody else first. So all the ex-band members and the multiple NFs. I'm actually shooting a show next week called Breaking the Band about that. That's on Reels as a biographer record. But I wanted to get that's such an iconic band. We went back to Mike Flicker, and who produced all their 70s stuff, and then Keith Olsen and Ron Nevison and Richie Zito, everybody that produced all their 80s hits like These Dreams and, Alone and All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You, etc. And the goal was, Dwayne Barron, and the goal was to try to 3D perspective of that group kind of at work in the studio. And then Howard Lease, their old guitar player, gave me Ann Wilson's email, and I took a shot and just emailed her, would you and Nancy be willing to talk to me? She forwarded on that email to their manager, Carol Peters, who called me back pretty pissed that I'd email her directly. I was younger and didn't really, you learn as you go. And rather, I was expecting her to tell me, we're going to say you. Instead, she said, oh, well, let me go ahead and get you interviews with the girls. I was like, really? Mm-hmm. And so that actually led to me then interviewing Ann and Nancy Wilson elaborately about the creation of their entire catalog, how they got together, how they grew up. I interviewed their best friend, Stu Ennis, and co-writer. So it gives you the behind-the-scenes story, which is what I try to do. I try to tell you both about how they got started, what their inspirations were, what they grew up listening to when they started playing, etc., how they got into the business, their trials and tribulations, and then also the behind-the-scenes of the in-the-studio making of these records. So as you stream along, you can read about and listen to these songs at the same time. That was an incredible experience. It was one of those books that, in another 20 years when I'm at 100 books, I'll still look back and count it as one of my prized collaborations for sure.
Well, I think that's one book that I definitely want to get and check out, because the only other thing that I saw with them was an interview they did with Dan Rather.
Yeah.
Did you see that interview? I
did, yeah, years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, other than that, there really hasn't been that much that I've seen with them.
Well, they're pretty guarded. Yeah, that's what was kind of an honor about it. I'm one of only 2 writers that they've done books with, and one thing that I really try to do, I don't do any of this drugs. They didn't have a lot of drug stuff, but I don't do any of it, who was dating and sleeping with who, and who broke up with who, and who was doing what drugs, and I don't do any of that kind of stuff. All that I focus on is the music making, and that allows me a lot more access, because I've got a pretty good track record with I don't do any anonymous sources. Everything in all of my books are on the record. And the good thing about that is it makes an artist feel a lot more comfortable opening up to you, because they know that, you're only there to really talk about the thing that really matters the most, and that's the music. As cheesy as that might sound. That's been a coda of mine for my entire career.
No, I don't think it sounds cheesy at all. In fact, I think it's very admirable, because you're maintaining your reputation as well as theirs. And I think that's mutual trust.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's one of the most... trust is one of the least common denominators.
Common traits, yeah.
And so to establish it and maintain it with people requires an incredible amount of just honesty on both ends. And you get a lot more out of a book that way in the writing context, because, I do memoirs as well. I've done memoirs across the spectrum. I did a Merle Haggard and Freddie Powers book called The Spree of 83. I've done Big Smo with country rapper Kenny Aronoff, the Joe Satriani. You just go across the line. In every one of those instances, Teddy Riley and I have been working about 7 years on his book that's coming out next year. These are long-term commitments, and these people are opening up to you about every aspect of their lives, and not all of those are going to make the book, but it requires that they trust you. And that's something that, I think today especially is an important thing for the record business, because it's harder and harder to make a living in it. And so that people are that much more picky about what projects they do take on. So for anybody that's even thinking about going into this, I write in a really specific niche called music biography and narrative nonfiction, but either of those, which is memoir, you have to really, really have that element to your process. So, and I say that because I have peers of mine, I'm not going to name anyone, but that do these unauthorized books where you've got, and I even had to write a couple of those early in my career, and I hated doing them because you want to be able to work with the source. You don't want to write about them and then have years later them come back and go, what was this, or whatever, if you get another opportunity where you could have, waited. So anyway, it's a balancing act, but yeah, there's an incredible trust factor involved, and it's a huge responsibility. I take it very seriously.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, in this business, we've all heard the horror stories, and you being in the music business have probably heard many.
More than will ever appear in print.
Yeah, I'm sure, And I just had this conversation with a music producer in L.A. who was talking about, he just wrote a book called How to Make It in the New Music Business. And we got into this whole thing about the ripoff of the record labels, the horror stories you hear about the artist suddenly finds himself owing $100,000 to Sony. And just with everything being so DIY these days, it's like you don't know who you're talking to. Anybody with a blog can show up at the red carpet, and you have no idea who these people are.
Yeah, that's very true. And, that's one thing, too, that within writing is frustrating because anyone can do an ebook. It's just not the same thing as actually doing a proper... I'm not trying to knock it for starting writers, but back when I started out, there wasn't even ebooks. They were, my first book deal was in 2000, and back then ebooks were just coming on the market, and they were a niche thing. They were like MP3s, before Napster really came along, and so the good thing about ebooks is that they certainly add an element, sort of another option, as do audiobooks. I read audiobooks for Blackstone Audio. There's a 2-volume, 50-hour, because the book's 600 pages, version of this Behind the Boards National that's out now. And but it's tricky because you have different generations. I'm very lucky being 44 and growing up in the 80s that people between about 30 and 60 like to read physical books, and thank God that saved the book industry from going the way of the record store industry. So you have that option. But as a writer, if you're going to work in the business today, you have to be prepared to basically submit not only to those mediums and make sure that it's more revenue potentially, but also you have to promote your stuff. You have to embrace social media, which I'm not crazy about. I do have a Facebook page, but you have to have Twitter and all these other things. And that's just because so many different people take their input from so many different, formats, especially in this COVID shutdown. Our ability to integrate, the reading experience with the listening experience, for people that are stuck at home has been pivotal. Because the books were all delayed in getting pressed because all the bookstores closed. So all the publishers,
Right.
no matter who you talk to, for 2 months, no one could get their books pressed. So that delayed everyone's books getting into stores for 2 months. So this book will be in Barnes & Noble probably at the end of August. What it would have been June.
Yeah.
So I definitely have embraced it, but it's definitely something that, even when the record business, you talk about the shrinking revenue streams of streaming taking over so much more. I interviewed a guy named Desmond Child for another series I do, and it was actually Behind the Boards Volume 4. It's another rock producers volume. The first two, 1 and 2, that Hal Leonard put out were also rock producers. But he was telling me, him and John Bon Jovi, and then John Bon Jovi told me this directly too when I interviewed him for Kenny Arno's book. They split $1 million stream Living on a Prayer check for like $100. Him, Richie Sambora, and Desmond Child. He showed me the check. It was like $33.3333, and he was used to getting over the years, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So yeah, it's much more challenging to make a living in, and that's part of the point of these books. I try to really tell them stories about these people, but also there's a Bible's worth of advice, not to misuse that term, but there's just a literal, that, a book in and of itself is advice for aspiring songwriters, aspiring artists, aspiring recording artists, aspiring producers. It's in there. And that's really important to me as well, because you need to know so much more than you used to. And, really to your point, it's more important these days than ever to know, because, like you said, you could get hit up in an email by a quote-unquote music manager that might have a really legitimate-looking homepage, and it turns out to be total BS. And next thing you know, you sign your publishing, signed into a management contract you can't get out of for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then even if you do, whatever you did during that period, you got to pay them. There's all kinds of nightmare stories. So we really try to put a spotlight on the importance of having like a good agent, having a good manager, having a good publisher, having a good lawyer. And these things all cost money, or they cost you commissions. So either way, you're paying for them. But they're really important to surround, that classic adage, surround yourself with good people.
Well, the problem that I see with music is that there's so many of these pay up front scams going on. And it never used to be like that, It used to be where if you were lucky and somebody came along, they didn't get paid until you got paid. They took a % of what you paid. You got paid.
Well, and that's how it should work.
That's how it should work. Oh, yeah.
To your point.
One last thing, and then we got to wrap this up. I just wanted to hit on one of your books. Behind the Boards 2, The Making of Rock and Roll's Greatest Records Revealed. What are the top 3 in that book? I'm curious.
Oh, man.
Do you remember?
I'd have to.
Okay.
There's guys like, between those first 2 books, I could better answer the question because they came as a series, a 2-part series. Jack Douglas from Aerosmith, Jimi Hendrix's producer Eddie Kramer, Bob Ezrin from Pink Floyd, Bones Howe from Tom Waits, Bob Rock from Motley and Metallica, Tom Weirman that did Twisted Sister and Motley, and everybody is in those 2 books. If you know the history of rock record production, Andy Johns that did Led Zeppelin, the list just goes on and on and on. I'm so proud of those because Daniel Lanois, because U2, Flood is going to be in the next one. Those are really cool because it was because of those that I got to do this one on country producers. They're definitive, though. I'm looking at the contents right now, so I can tell you probably my favorite from the book, if I had to pick a couple. Bill Simswick, who of course did the Eagles, Jim Gaines, who did Stevie Ray Vaughan, Mike Shipley, that worked with Mutt Lange on all the Def Leppard stuff, Keith Forsey did Billy Idol, and all those Don't Forget About Me and Flashdance and all those 80s soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
Frankie Sullivan from Eye of the Tiger. There's Chris Kinsey did the Stones, Start Me Up, and a bunch of records. So there's Danny Korchmar, of course, did the Don Henley stuff and Jackson Browne. So there's a bunch of Joe Blaney, who produced Rock the Casbah with the Clash. So that book's got a great number of people in it. And then the first one, if you'll indulge me for just 1 second, Mario C. from the Beasties, Butch Vig from Smashing Pumpkins, Hugh Padgham, of course, that did the Police and Genesis. Don Was is in here. It's such a privilege to have all these guys. Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. It just goes on and on. Dave Jordan from Jane's Addiction. Well, no matter your genre, there's someone in here for you. Kevin Olsen from Journey. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, well, Jake, we got to wrap this up. That was a lot of information in 20 minutes, and I thank you very much for coming on the show. My guest is Jake Brown.
I hope it wasn't too much.
No, you can check out Jake's books at jakebrownsbooks.com. Very nice. Very easy.
JakeBrownBooks.com and Amazon. You can find everything there as well at Blackstone Audio. Thank you for your time.
All right, super. Take care, Jake.
Thank you, sir.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records, and it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, Stuart, Epps, EPPS, at talk, TALK, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you. Bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Thoughts are hurricanes in my head, like a wind blowing in and out again. There is no escaping from feeling forsaken. I feel like I'm drowning head to toe. Lungs full of water, I'm ready to float away from reality, oh, from reality, reality, oh, from reality, oh, from reality, oh, we call home. Black and white. You tell me truths I only see as lies. I can't undo it. I'm lost in my torment. Oh, feel like I'm drowning head to toe. Above the water, I'm ready to flow away from reality, oh, from reality, reality, oh, from reality, oh, from reality, oh, we call home. Lungs full of water, I'm ready to flow, to flow.